I'm going to ask Anya and Mathieu to come back up on stage. And Yasmin is still here as well. So we have a little more than 25 minutes to have a more extended session for questions and answers. We just had all sorts of great information. Hopefully people have had a chance to think about things a little bit. If you have a bit of a broader question or a question that might need, that you think might deserve a bit of either a longer answer or that you'd like to ask of more than one organization, now's the time to do it. So I'm going to open the floor, and I have a few questions in mind if they're needed as well. Lots of questions.
From my perspective, it took about a generation for astronomers to really internalize and adapt the education and public outreach aspect of broader impact as being a sort of central pillar of our community. What can we do to accelerate the even broader definitions of broader impact that are now being more readily discussed, so that it doesn't take another generation for us to make this, incorporate this more centrally?
Yasmin, can I ask you to take that first?
Yes, sure. I can say what I think. So me, from my perspective, I think the people, the community always think about the astronomers as the person that is a little bit farther, there is on the computer, or just, I don't see there's a lot of connection in some places with the scientists itself. I think you make better programs when you know the community and when you connect with them. I think most of the professional, the scientists that work on these facilities, I think it will be good to see them going to the town, not just taking the flight from and going to the observatory itself and being just working and just being with your team. Like, get out of that team and go to the community, go around the town, go to the activities, connect with them. And I think once you see them and you learn from them and you see what is out there, it helps you to put you in a position that you might think, okay, I know them now a little bit, so maybe I can come with programs or ideas that can connect with this community because I know a little bit now about them. It's just being out there and get out of your team and explore what is around and connect with the community. I think that will be helpful.
Great. Anything to add, Anya or Mathieu?
Yeah, I think you are quite right. It's taken a whole generation just to get the education and public outreach side right. And so in order to accelerate that, I think my best answer or my best advice to you would be find somebody who does this for a living. In your institution, outside of your institution, we're all very happy to collaborate, because it's not, and if you are planning an activity, to talk to them about, what are the broader impacts that we can pull out of that particular project. And, it really can be as simple as giving a catering contract for one of your events to, a local company, to support that, or it could be, that you're going to participate in a role modeling program in your institution that you didn't even know about. So, work with the specialist in your institution or within the field to help you design and really ramp that up very quickly. And spread the word.
I think just briefly from me on that is, designing and implementing these programs takes money, and it takes FTEs, right? It doesn't take people doing this on the sidelines of their daily jobs. So there still needs to be more resources for research facilities to do that broader impact. And I think there still needs to be a realization that it's not a nice to have, it's an essential, right? And I would hope that in the coming years, we get better at, securing funding from funding organizations and alternative sources of funding to deliver these programs, because they're absolutely essential, as we've found out over the years.
Yeah, and it's, just to add to what Matthew was saying, if you start treating your broader impacts as a project and really start designing it that way, planning it that way, budgeting for it that way, I can guarantee you now that your success rate for proposals is going to go up, markedly.
Great, let's move on to the next question.
Thank you all. Thank all three of you for the lovely presentations. Maybe relatedly, in some sense of it takes money, you need to get out there, it takes people, it takes time. There are so many Indigenous communities, different Indigenous communities that are affected by both of these telescopes, both of these facilities. And how do you engage all of them? Because I know even within a particular Indigenous community, I'm sure there are differing opinions and you want to do your best job. And we've learned a lot from how terribly we approached Mauna Kea and things like that, like how to do better. But there's so many people and so many different, how do you do that in the best way possible, most responsible way and collaborative way?
One of you two. Yasmin went first last time.
All right, I'll go first. That's a great question, and it's a difficult question. I think, speaking from my perspective, right, I sit at the headquarters of the SK in the UK, and it's very important for people like me, and I think for everyone, for users of facilities, but also for senior leaders, to have a good understanding of the local communities, around the facilities that we're building and that we're going to be using. And those communities are complex, right? Their historical contexts are completely different to ours, and it's very important to understand the specifics of that history, to have an awareness of the specifics of that history and of those communities. So that's speaking from a perspective of being sort of somewhat removed from the work that happens locally, right? And so I had experience in Chile, for example, and I've had experience in Australia and in South Africa, and they're very different contexts, right? And then the local work, I mean, Anya knows a lot more than I do about, what was done in South Africa, but there's very close engagement with the communities over very long periods of time to establish relationships, right? There's been monthly briefings with the local communities all in the towns all around the site in South Africa for years, right? And I know our Australian colleagues as well have had years of engagement, very regular engagement, face-to-face with the Indigenous communities, to establish relationships of trust, right? And understand what their needs are and how to work with them. But it's complex, right?
Yeah, and that complexity needs the attention it deserves. Yeah. So I think the first very important lesson that many people in this work have learned is tribes, none of the tribes, none of the First Nations, none of the communities are the same. You cannot say all Navajo are the same. And so, to be able to understand that you cannot take a broader impact project and transplant it, to different communities, that simply won't work. But secondly, if you are going to want to work with, with local communities, I would say slowly, consistently, and really with integrity. And what has been such an incredible lesson for me, both in South Africa, but also, the work being done by our colleagues in New Mexico, is, that work really has to be done by local people. It's not going to work to put a stakeholder engagement person, from another community into local community. It's really, there's real magic when a community member also works, for an observatory.
And having somebody there, right? Your contacts there being
with an open door.
Exactly, and being there for a long time, right? It really doesn't work to have say, somebody placed there or detached there for 3 years and then they move on to another job and another person comes in, because the relationships are personal, right? So it makes a huge difference to have somebody there, you know, over the long term.
Yeah. If you are not from that community, you will not ever know what it's like to be in that community.
Can I just make sure Yasmin has a chance to jump in if she'd like?
Thank you. Yes, of course. I think that this is a great question, and I'm agree with that I have heard here. As an Indigenous woman, I think it's very important that all these projects, I think a lot of people has a lot of good intentions when it comes to work with Indigenous communities, but of course there is certain steps that needs to take in order to approach them properly. One of them, of course, is a knowledge history. A knowledge history. There is a long history of a bad long history that for the Indigenous community, so it's not always easy. Like I said before, also acknowledge when we work with them, I think it is important when you acknowledge that history, there is a conflict transformation during the process that you approach Indigenous communities. Second, you need to build this relationship with a lot of time in advance if you want to grow and build something together, and you go with an open heart to share what you can share, and they will share with you what is shareable under the context, and then you build something together. I think there are a lot of resources out there for government agencies to work with Indigenous communities, to produce educational resources, to contribute for them to advance. But I don't know how many of those grants or those opportunities are just for build relationship, because building relationship, it takes time to get to a point to where Indigenous communities can trust and can just feel in the same level, and they can communicate with you, and we can work together. It takes time, and time also it takes funds. We need grants, and they can support the community, the connection, they build the trust with them and make it a plan with a lot of time ahead. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that the point that Yasmin raises about they will share with you what is shareable is so important. There is knowledge, for those of you who are wanting to go down this road, that is sacred and will not be shared with you. Firstly, please don't take that personally. In fact, if a community doesn't want to work with you, don't take that personally at all. It just means you don't have something they want.
Move on to the next question.
Thank you. This is really important and really beautiful. The development of the roundedness of our field of astronomy. And I just wanted to share with you this year at the AAS, we had an amazing presentation from the people with the TMT. And one of the most wonderful things was they said they sat down with the people at the bottom of the hill, put out the chairs, and they said, well, what do you want? And they said, our kids aren't profiting at all. Go tutor them. So now all of the TMT people on the staff, 5% of their time has to be going to the schools, tutoring the kids. And in some way that it's like this dialogue, this whole field, it's helping our astronomers really sort of develop their own roundedness of character and to benefit from all the skills that have been put in, so that it's not just one way, that our character is developed and shared in multiple ways and dimensions. And we realize the richness of the whole field that we are working in and how it can interface with the larger community, the benefits of the whole field of astronomy for humanity. So I just wanted to share that because it's an exciting development.
There's a question from online. Oh, okay, maybe it's not online. Okay.
So I have a question about the NGVLA and the Learning Center. I think that's a great idea, but the NGVLA is going to have a much larger footprint than the VLA. Have you thought about how you engage the many, many communities that it will touch across North America? It seems an almost daunting task, but would you take your learning center on the road periodically? What's the plan there? I'm sure you've thought about it.
So as I said, you know, these are extremely complicated but wonderful problems to have. And so to just put it into context for you, the Education and Workforce Development Plan just for the design and development phase is already on 25 pages. So it's, you know, it's mind-blowing. Poor Tony's going to have a heart attack. But we really have to, and I think, you know, people who work in education, especially over the last 3 years, have realized this, and that is that you have to access learners where they are and at the level that they're at. So yes, and already, you know, this is part of our best practices, is that whatever is developed for this learning center needs to be available, you know, for students anywhere. And I say students, I mean adult learners, I mean K to 12, anyone who's willing and able to learn about astronomy. This needs to be as accessible as possible, and, you know, as low cost as well. So if we're talking about, for example, just the 30 lesson plans we've developed now, you know, you cannot expect an educator, for example, to do something practical in class if they don't have the funding when they're buying pencils themselves for their students. So you really need to be able to look at, okay, what is accessible for this teacher? What is low cost? You know, what does this community have around them? And again, there's that co-design. You know, you won't know until you go to that community and ask the teachers in that community to prototype the lesson plans for you. But yes, there are, as I said, you know, 200 and how many dishes are we on now? You know, and initially the idea was to work with communities where we have operations. And then I got this lovely note from Eric, who I see has run away. He's like, why not in every single state in the United? There you are. And I was like, oh, damn. You know, so yes, it has to be accessible as far as possible. So those are definitely in the plans.
See a question behind it.
I just wondered if you've ever really tried to contrast our approach, particularly with the SKA, but also with the NGVLA, to that of other communities that interact with the Indigenous communities, namely the mining and resource extraction groups. It might be a rather low bar, I don't know, but nevertheless, it might be useful to understand our approach and see what they do. Do they just buy their way in, or do they have the same kind of problems that we do? And have they taken approaches, because they've been very successful, for example, in Western Australia and elsewhere in South Africa. It just makes me wonder whether or not such a study would be useful.
It's your turn.
That's a great question. I've got a couple of examples in mind, not directly SK related, but I know in my time in Chile, there was some engagement between comms and outreach people with the mining industry to talk about some of this, you know, and exchange about how they work with local communities. Another forum where we discuss these sort of things is mostly a European one, but it's a small community of communicators called PARI, Public Awareness of Research Infrastructures. And that brings together people who work in communications and outreach and education from research facilities in different areas of science, so astronomy, particle physics, biology, you know, all of that. And so there we exchange lessons learned and you know, good practice on how to work with local communities and how to do education and so on. But yeah, I don't know if you have more examples.
I think Doug might have a few comments.
Yeah.
Yes, just thought I'd make a couple of comments on the way this is addressed in Australia. I mean, I think we're quite lucky in one way that around 30 years ago, we had a High Court decision that changed the nature of land tenure in Australia. And what that's meant in the previous generation is we sort of built a legislated framework behind how we solve these problems together, the opportunities and the challenges. What that means for this conversation, of course, is that there's not really a fundamental difference between the way we behave and the way, say, a mining company behaves. We have, of course, a long engagement, and we work with the traditional owners on opportunities and benefits and what they want in exchange for permission to use their land for projects. And then that leads to a legally binding contract with intergenerational benefits for the life of the project.
Any last questions? We're into here. I see Douglas.
I just want to ask a slightly harder question, which is, we talk about indigenization of science, and I don't know where to draw the boundary, so I don't know if anybody else does. So it's clear if we're doing an educational thing and we're going into a First Nations community that we should include First Nations ways of knowing, or whatever you call it, and that's obvious. But on the other hand, when I do cosmology research, there's nothing that anybody can teach me about how the universe works except scientists. So somewhere in between those things, there's a line. And I want to be respectful and empathetic and so on, but I don't know where I start being a hard-nosed scientist and say, I don't care about what you're saying because it doesn't impact my science. So where is how do we figure out how to do that as scientists? Because that's the thing that really I don't know right now how to do.
Yasmin, would you be comfortable addressing that?
Yeah, I can give an answer to that. But can you please repeat the concept, because it's first time that I'm hearing the indigenous in science. Can you repeat it, please?
There's a lot of discussion about indigenization of science, which means that somebody with a different way of knowing about the world it's an equally valid way of thinking about things. But that's not true in science. Right? So that's certainly true if we're doing an educational activity in a school. We have to try to be empathetic towards, First Nations star stories and so on, which is obvious. But then it's not the case when we're doing, real hardcore scientific research. And I don't know how to decide where I stop being an empathetic human being and where I start being a hard scientist.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I don't think, indigenous people were the first scientists in this world. They look at the sky and based it on the observations for millennia. They were able to predict whether to harvest the land, to locate their houses in proper places because the weather or because, right? So I think having a diverse way of seeing things is when it's going to help us to find the answer to the biggest questions. If we don't include different people with different background that have different ways to see and interpret, they feel and connect what is out there, I don't think we're going to find answer for the questions that we have. And for me, I think it's not okay. I think, science is right, but we need to be open to hear others, because of their background, their history, they connect, they see, interpret things differently, because that can give us a clue for something that we haven't found it in just hard science. And we don't know where it can be the next discovery there, thanks to the diverse group of people and diverse ways of knowing a problem or seeing a problem. It can help us to address. And it requires a very long conversation, but that's what I will just say for now.
Great. So let's thank all of our speakers and everyone who asked questions. Thanks very much again, and I'll hand back to the poster flash talks.
We're around, all week. So if anybody wants to engage on this, you're very welcome to come and talk to us.
Thank you.